welcome to another Anatomical Gangster podcast. I am your host, Sue Hitzman. If you are new to this podcast, would you do me a favor? Will you click that subscribe button? I know a lot of you guys watch the podcast, but you are actually not subscribed. And I'm always looking to get innovators on this podcast to learn from them, to share their wisdom with my community. And it will help me a lot if you would click that subscribe button. So I hope that you'll do that for me today. Today, we are stepping into, I think, not just a conversation, but perhaps something that's going to really move research forward. This has been a conversation that has been waiting to happen, at least in my mind. It's a dialogue between fascia and consciousness, between quantum theories and embodied experiences. Now, just to give a little bit of a backstory, I have been thinking about consciousness for most of my life, and I'm always looking at it from different resources, from different communities. And this year, at the 7th International Fascia Research Congress, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Carol M. Davis, lectured on consciousness and fascia, and it sparked a cascade of questions by the audience. And John Sharkey, who is a clinical anatomist, was there, and he had chimed in about Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff's work on the ORC-OR theory, which is I'll get to in a minute, about how consciousness arises in the neuronal microtubules. But I want to also point out that Dr. J.C. Guimberteau, who's going to be another guest here today, his pioneering work on the microscopic network of fascia actually reminds us that microtubules aren't confined to neurons. They actually exist in cells that produce the extracellular matrix. Now, also, this year's keynote speaker at the Fascia Congress, Dr. Stephen Porges, also offered powerful insights that the autonomic nervous system shapes and is shaped by fascia. It's kind of a reciprocal relationship that might hold clues to how the body regulates, responds, and perhaps even becomes aware or conscious. So what's more is that fascia and the autonomic nervous system, they're not just two systems in the body that interact. They actually co-evolved at the onset in embryology. They're like polarity. Their polarity and their rhythm and their responsiveness are not separate systems. They are intertwined expressions of the body's earliest intelligence. And so when I think about these things together, it really clicks. I almost get goosebumps thinking about it, because we know that neuronal microtubules, these hollow tubes inside neurons, are central to intracellular transport, polarity, and possibly quantum coherence. And Dr. Hameroff's ORC or OR theory suggests that they may host quantum processes that give rise to conscious moments. But here's the twist. Fibroblasts, the cells that are embedded in fascia and the extracellular matrix, the ECM, they also contain microtubules. They aren't quantum processors in the OR sense, but they are deeply involved in mechanotransduction, how cells sense and respond to mechanical forces, biomechanical signals that regulate microtubular polymerization, depolymerization, and interaction with motor proteins. So fascia's ability to generate electrical potentials in response to mechanical stress, I think, might actually influence cellular behavior, including microtubular alignment and signaling. So while microtubulars are intracellular, their behavior is shaped by extracellular cues. And microtubulars are not physically present in the extracellular matrix. They are present in the cells that are embedded within the ECM, like fibroblasts or endothelial cells, right? So the ECM doesn't host microtubules directly, but it could orchestrate their dance because the extracellular matrix influences these cells despite not containing microtubules as a part of its own structure. Now, add to this fascia's liquid crystalline properties, its piezoelectric behavior, and its innate relationship with the autonomic nervous system, I think we suddenly begin to get a glimpse of a possibility. So my question and my thought is, could fascia and the extracellular matrix act as a resonant field, modulating that quantum spark of neuronal microtubules? Could consciousness be not just a brain-bound phenomenon, but a full-body experience, a symphony of coherence between structure and vibration. That's the inquiry that I'm bringing to you today by asking these four pioneering educators about their idea of life, consciousness, and quantum processes still being discovered today. Not to answer my question definitively, but to explore together their unique perspectives and their research. Because maybe neuronal microtubules are the spark which creates consciousness, and fascia is the chamber where it resonates. And maybe together, they form a bridge between cognition and sensation, a mirror reflecting the wholeness of who we truly are. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. And again, please click that subscribe button, comment, share this one with your friends. And I hope that you enjoy this enlightening conversation with Carol Davis, Dr. Jean-Claude Guimberteau, John Sharkey, and Dr. Stuart Hameroff.
Joining me today are four extraordinary minds whose work has shaped how we, especially me, understands fascia consciousness and the architecture of life itself. All four of you have been so intriguing to me to think out of the box. And Dr. Carol Davis, she's a pioneer in integrative rehabilitation, and she's a voice for the spiritual dimensions of fascia and light touch interventions. John Sharkey is a clinical anatomist and fascia researcher whose insights bridge biomechanics, anatomy, and quantum theory. Dr. Jean-Claude Guimberteau is a visionary surgeon, and he's also a filmmaker whose microscopic explorations of fascia have transformed how we see the body's inner landscape. And Dr. Stuart Hameroff. He's a leading theorist in consciousness studies, known for the ORC-OR theory of consciousness that locates awareness in quantum processes within neuronal microtubules. So together, we're going to have a conversation to think about a single question, which is, could consciousness actually be a full body phenomenon? And what role might fascia play in that unfolding? So I'm going to start this conversation with Carol, because Carol, at the International Fascia Research Congress, you did a roundtable kind of on fascia as a biological and conscious medium. So from your integrative lens, do you see fascia as a biological medium through which consciousness might express itself, not just metaphorically, but as a tissue that reflects, transmits, or even participates in awareness?
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, when I submitted this, I submitted it as a roundtable discussion in order for me to learn from other people. And the question was, is there a link between fascia and consciousness? And then I did a deep dive on consciousness research. And boy, there's an awful lot coming out in philosophy and in psychology and in neuroanatomy about the nature of consciousness. And I was trying to link that with my own particular understanding of what fascia is and how it works in human life.
Mhm.
And I had it always has to do with me with fascia being more than simply tissue or connective tissue or a system. It's the more. I love John Sharkey's quote. I use it all the time. We do not honor the ocean by calling it a river. The fascia is so much more, and it's the more that fascinates me. And then along comes A.T. Still with his quote about, it seems to me that fascia seems to be where the soul dwells. And I think, oh, what is that? What's the concept of soul have to do with biology? And you use that word spiritual. I get bristly when people talk about me being spiritual. I think I'm much more appreciative of the concept of mystery, of what it is that we're pointing toward that we can't quite get a handle on. And of course, that's fascia to me. But when I think about this question, fascia as a biological medium through which consciousness might express itself, not just metaphorically, but as a tissue that reflects, transmits, or even participates in awareness. And as soon as I think about awareness, I think about sensory input, sensory function, somatic and emotional, interoceptive awareness. And then as soon as I go there, I think sympathetic and parasympathetic, and I'm immediately with Porges at his International Fascia Research Congress final video, where he pulled together so much of what we were learning about all week long in his connection between vagus and fascia and how they are working together. And I was so struck by this, and I'll end with this. I don't want to go on forever because you know I could. But fascia as a co-regulator, not co-integrator, a co-regulator of vagal stimulation, and how the imprint of trauma seems to be somehow reflected in fascia. And then his concept too, how did he say it? Fascia enables the nervous system to translate internal physiological signals into embodied behavior, shaping, posture, breath, affect, presence, as a kind of an emergent property, as a complex organizational system, an emergent property of what Jaap van der Wal calls our innerness, that innerness filled with fascial field. And then this, I'll end up with the concept of what is the more, you know, how, what is consciousness? And it's such a 100% personal experience. Nobody has my consciousness. Nobody has access to my consciousness except me or you, to yours. And and therefore, how do we grasp what that ultimate subjective experience is in order to be able to frame it biologically? Or is everything that we come up with, and this is the problem, is everything that we come up with a product of the thing that we're trying to come up with?
Mhm.
And is consciousness constitutive of all the rest of it? And my sense, of course, is that it's not just a product of the mind, but that fascia, and my wonderful conversation with Jean-Claude, I don't know whether you remember Jean-Claude, 2015, we were in the dining room of that hotel where we were staying in Scotland, and you said a videographer was coming to video you later in the week. And you said, and he said to me, "What is this fascia stuff anyway?" And Jaap and I were there with you, and we all laughed. And I said, "Jean-Claude, when will everyone know about fascia?" And you looked up and you put your arm up and you said, "When the whole world recognizes that fascia is the foundation of life.
Mhm.
Fascia is the foundation of life." So that's where I am.
Are you sure? Are you sure, Carol, that I said the foundation?
Well, that's what I remember. Now, let me
Yeah.
talk briefly about memory, because that's all a part of this process.
No,
You know,
we-
yeah, but what I'm hearing you say, and I think that this is really important, I want to go back to what you had said about Stephen Porges, and I'd said it in the introduction that he kind of came up with this statement, which I thought was maybe only the second time I've ever heard a scientist say something like this, is that in embryology, these two systems have co-evolved, that it's not the nervous system and then fascia, or fascia and the nervous system, that somehow there was a co-evolution of these things coming together from
Right.
the onset. And that makes me think of the concepts from Jaap van der Wal about polarity, and everything needs polarity. And so to me, they kind of have that polar I love what you said, Carol, though, and I love that sensory presence is so important too.
So I love my story, Jean-Claude. If you're
How do
going
we
to
keep that
interject
story?
facts,
I keep it.
if you're going to interject facts into it, then, you know, go ahead.
And now, so John, when we were at the Congress, John was there, and John started talking about, and maybe it was actually, Carol, you had talked about Roger Penrose's work, and that was one of the things that Stuart also talked about. So, you know, when John started mentioning that, I thought,
Yeah.
gosh, this is another great person to kind of talk about fascia and quantum dialogue, because I know that you have really been somebody curious about consciousness for a long time. And you've spoken on fascia as a locally modulating system. So my question to you would be, do you believe fascia could participate in quantum level signaling, not just as a biomechanical structure, but as a tissue capable of sensing, expressing, and perhaps even shaping conscious experience?
Okay. So first, Sue, what I would say is that there is obviously going to be, I think there's going to be a problem with language because ultimately we're probably talking about connective tissue, and then we're talking about speciality within, a spectrum of connective tissue, and we're using the word fascia. So my stance on it is that the body knows itself through fascia, or if we were to talk from an embryological viewpoint, we'd say mesenchyme, before the mind can think itself into being. So from that viewpoint, yes, I do believe fascia participates in quantum level signaling, but not in a way of a miniature computer performing calculations. I think fascia is a locally modulating continuum that operates with a globally coherent field. So fascia is a living aqueous collagen based semiconductor. We've talked about that, yourself and myself, in the past. It's continuously sensing, adapting, and transmitting information through a word I don't like, but mechanical, electrical, and photonic means. And every local change in geometry, every micro strain or variation in hydration alters charge density and field potential, sending ripples through the entire body's coherence field. So from a quantum perspective, fascia may serve as a biological interface where microscopic coherence, perhaps at the level of proton tunneling, hydrogen bonding, as I say, photonic exchange, meets macroscopic awareness. So these are not abstract effects. Ordered water, collagens, piezoelectric properties, biophoton conduction all suggest that fascia supports quantum compatible behavior at biological temperatures. Now, relating this to consciousness, I often describe fascia as supporting both local and global consciousness. Local consciousness is what allows a region of the body to express sentience, its own knowing of position, tension, temperature, safety. And global consciousness is the integrated awareness that arises from all of those local modulations working coherently as one body. So you can see this distinction quite clearly in wide awake surgery. When a surgeon operates without general anesthetic, the patient is awake, they're alert and globally conscious, but the local fascia has been chemically switched off, we'll say. The surgeon can cut through the tissues that are otherwise highly sentient, yet the patient feels nothing. And in that moment, local consciousness is silenced while global consciousness remains intact. And that tells us something, I think, profound. Fascia participates in the modulation of conscious experience. It doesn't generate consciousness, of course, but it shapes how consciousness is expressed, sensed, and localized. And in that sense, I think fascia forms the living interface between the quantum field of possibility and the embodied field of experience. It's a medium where the global coherence of being finds what I would call its local voice.
Oh, I love that. That's
So
great.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm coming to you from Dublin, where Erwin Schrödinger spent, he says, the 17 happiest years of his life. So
He had Guinness.
that's fantastic. I mean, what a great way to express how fascia is playing some form of a role there. There's so much stuff to unpack.
that's my big interest, is in terms of of local versus global.
I love that idea. And that is so amazing, like what they're doing now. I mean, my aunt just had a total knee replacement under local anesthesia. And I just think to myself, I just wouldn't even want to have the bad effect of like suddenly feeling something happening. But she said, I was like half awake, but not really. But like they weren't under full anesthesia. That was mind blowing to me, such a big surgery. But I digress.
I don't want to hear it.
I know. So now I'm gonna pose a question now to you, Jean-Claude, about cellular behavior within the extracellular matrix. And in your endoscopic explorations of living tissue, you have revealed the stunning behavior of cells, the cellular behavior within the extracellular matrix. And in your film of cells, fibers, and the living human body, you discuss the probable existence of cellular behavior and consciousness based on certain endoscopic observations that you've shared in your work. So based on what you've seen, do you believe that the microtubules inside fibroblasts and the other extracellular embedded cells could reflect or respond to the matrix in a way that contributes to how the body, how I sense, feel, or even expresses a form of awareness?
Well, why not? Why not? But it's an hypothesis. It's an hypothesis. First, I want to say that I have been surprised by the title of of this meeting about conscience, because it's a very difficult field, and frankly speaking, it's difficult for me to speak about that. But when I did all this exploration, I have been surprised by the cellular behavior. And this cellular behavior has been filmed, and after many observations, many hours, I developed the idea that in these groups of cells, there is a comportment. It's not the fruit of hazard. There is a way, there is a sense. And when you look to some cells along a fiber, why are they here? Where are they going? For which purpose? Which kind of information they have? They go all in the same sense. Some quickly, some slowly, not at the same speed. So little by little, for me, it has been surprising, because I was little by little forced to think that at the level of the cells, there is a comportment, a conscious behavior, and at the level of my patient, and I can talk with my patient, there is another level of conscience. And my patient ignores absolutely the cellular level. Mm. And my question was, are the cells able to have a global conscience of the body? That's my only, how can I say, that's my only question concerning conscience. But I am sure one thing, the comportment of cells is not the fruit of hazard. There is a sense. We call that teleonomy. Teleonomy. It's not teleology, it's teleonomy. But the body, inside the body, there is an information, a global information. And I think that the cells are globally informed of what happened inside the body. Each cell is able to have this kind of observation. All cells are different. All cells are different in shape, in nature. So there is a sort of a world, cellular world, a collectivity of cells, and I am the fruit of this collectivity. So when I say I have my conscience, my soul, maybe not. Maybe not.
Wow. Yeah.
So we can discuss of that, and my English is not so good today, and sometimes, but for me, it how can I say? It has been, frankly speaking, very troubling to observe these cells.
Yeah,
Very troubling.
That was something in your video that kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I guess like you kind of always think like cells are everywhere. They're just everywhere. But
No,
here,
no. Cells are not everywhere.
exactly, they are not everywhere. That's what I
Not
mean.
everywhere.
But you would think. And then again, you demonstrated. It's like, well, what the hell are they doing over there? There's like 12 cells like just kind of hanging out over there for what reason? But why are they, what are they doing? And that really, I mean, again, you listen to you explain that, and I think, what the hell are they doing over there? Like, why are they there? I don't know. Do they know why they're there? Like, are they talking to one another? So it made me think of cells as kind of being like little mini conscious things floating around, actually doing something intentionally, perhaps, but I don't know. But
Nobody knows. Nobody.
I love it. I love
I'd
it.
add, if I can, just before I'd say that,
Sure.
I'm not saying that fascia generates consciousness, but I'm saying that it translates it. It's how a thought becomes a gesture, and it's how a feeling becomes posture. And you can see it when someone experiences fear. As I say, the fascia tightens and the tissue literally changes tone to reflect the emotional feel. So perhaps consciousness is not, as Carl said, exclusively a spark in the brain, but a resonance through the whole body. Fascia might be the resonant field that allows consciousness to take shape, to have texture, to be lived. And one thing, it's not an organ, and fascia is not a system. It transcends a system. It's the process by which we are continuously connected locally and globally, from microtubule to movement. That's how I see it.
You're absolutely right, John. I share with you. And we have not to forget that cells and fibers are absolutely connected.
Yes.
There is no separation between cells and the fibrillar network. All of them are in the same system. So the transmission of the information is mechanically possible.
But the problem is we have a reductionist view in anatomy and in medicine, and we talk about parts, we talk about spaces, we talk about, it's nonsense. It's a solid.
But also, it's the only substance in the entire body that I've ever heard scientists argue, like, is it a tissue, an organ, or a system? And they can't quite classify it. I'm like, maybe it's none of those things. Maybe it's something else.
Absolutely
Maybe we need to define it somewhere else. Well, and now we're going to come to, again, Dr. Hameroff, when we chatted, and then I looked at your papers, to which I only understood not even half of what is going on in there, but I get the notion, I get the idea of what you're talking about, and this integration of neuronal and fascia microtubules. Like, could we integrate it? So my question to you is, after hearing all of these reflections and just this little drop of an idea, again, I've heard all three of these brilliant juggernauts in our industry land ideas that I hadn't heard before. So I would ask you, do you see a possibility that consciousness is not just confined to neurons, but maybe distributed throughout the body in dialogue with fascia, the fibroblasts, the autonomic nervous system? Could these systems modulate or mirror the quantum processes you've described in neuronal microtubules? Let's start there.
Yes. Is that enough?
Say no more. No, tell me more.
As you know, I've been interested in microtubules for a long time. Back in medical school over 50 years ago, I spent time in a cancer research lab watching cell division, mitosis, and everybody else got into the chromosomes. It was the dawn of the genetic revolution. But I got interested in the mitotic spindles for some reason, and the centrioles, and wondered how they knew where to go and how they had this intelligence to be able to pick the right chromosome and separate them and then pull them in the right direction and form the daughter cell and all this and that. And they seem to have some kind of information processing capacity. And back then in the early 70s, I was learning about computers and Boolean switching matrices and this and that. And I looked at the structure of microtubules, which had just been discovered back then, and they looked like these Boolean switching matrices. They looked like computers. They looked like they were designed to process information, but they were also actuators. They would actually do stuff. So I got the idea that they were processing information. It might have something to do with consciousness inside brain neurons. And I went into anesthesiology as a clinical career, but also to study consciousness through mechanism of anesthesia. And back then, the idea that anesthesia acted on microtubules would have been laughed at. But now it turns out that's exactly where they act, because everybody's been looking at the membrane proteins, but they can't work on the membrane proteins exclusively. We know that all anesthetics act on the same target. We know that from the Meyer-Overton correlation. And to make a long story short, the only protein that works for is tubulin, the component of microtubules.
Tubulin.
So in the brain, the tubulin is the most abundant protein, and so the brain, more than anything, is made of microtubules. 15% of all brain protein is tubulin. Another 15 is actin, another cytoskeleton. So 30% is in the cytoskeleton at least. And microtubules are in all cells, plants, animals, even archaebacteria. We just discovered to have them. And so anyway, I got the idea they were processing information, but that really didn't explain consciousness. And then somebody finally said, well, how's that going to explain consciousness? And I didn't know, and they suggested I read a book by Roger Penrose, which I did, about quantum physics and how quantum physics held the answers for what consciousness was. But Roger didn't have a good a molecule, a good structure in the brain that could do that. Neurons are too big and whatnot. So I read the book, and I've been studying microtubules, and I thought microtubules are what he needs. So I wrote to him and suggested it, and we got together and started our theory. And it turns out that microtubules are actually pretty good quantum devices. So, you know, we got ridiculed immediately and continuous, and even till today, by people who don't know any better, that the brain is too warm, wet, and noisy for delicate quantum effects. Because if you want to build a quantum computer in the lab, you have to do it at absolute zero temperature, because any thermal vibration will mess up the quantum states. Well, as an anesthesiologist, I knew that anesthesia acts by quantum effects and only affects consciousness, and anesthetics are soluble in a nonpolar, not wet, aromatic ring regions. So like benzene, phenyl rings, and indole rings that are in aromatic rings inside proteins, aromatic amino acids inside proteins. So inside proteins was where, and then which protein it eventually looks like microtubules. So the point is that inside these proteins, these aromatic rings can oscillate and couple and have quantum effects that don't have to worry about the warm temperature or water. There's no water because they exclude water. Oil and water don't mix. So where the anesthesia binds, where the consciousness is, there's no water. It's organized, these aromatic rings in kind of a geometric array. And we've now shown that you can demonstrate quantum effects of microtubules at ambient temperature, and that they're inhibited by anesthesia. We've done that research and can continue to do that. But let me turn to a question that Jean you asked, Jean-Claude. I think it was you, or maybe it was John, about does a cell, what'd you say? Does a cell recognize the brain or understand could a single cell have the same consciousness as the whole brain? Let's just take that. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant, but that's a key question, because we have single cell organisms that are pretty clever. I think they're conscious, and I think even plants are conscious, but they're conscious at a much slower frequency. So it's based on the number of collapses per second, and our brains, we have like 10 million per second, and a plant might have a few per second or a few per minute. So the cactus I'm looking at out my window might be having conscious moments, but those cells, that would be very, very slow, and maybe a couple per minute. But still, plants, they follow the sun. They have cognitive responses which go away with anesthesia. So I think they're conscious too, but at a much, much, much slower, lower intensity rate. But what we've been working on lately, which I think is relevant, especially the question of whether a single cell to the whole brain, is that microtubules seem to be what are called time crystals. And this is something new in physics that's come along actually in the last since 2012. The idea was first put forth by Frank Wilczek, who won a Nobel Prize for something else, where a crystal is something where it's periodic in space. A time crystal is something where you have dynamic patterns that repeat the same patterns but at different frequencies. So for example, my friend Anirban did these studies in India, applying nanotechnology to microtubules, and would stimulate and record, and they're good insulators, except when you hit a certain frequency and put that in, then you get high conductivity, almost superconductivity. So they become highly conductive and quantum at certain frequencies. And these repeat every 3 orders of magnitude in a particular pattern. You have 3 peaks, and each peak has 3 peaks. So triplets of triplets. And you see that in hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and terahertz. So every 3 orders of magnitude, you see the same resonant activity. And that means that a cell might have some kind of consciousness, very slow and low intensity, but it's kind of like a hologram where the whole brain has the same image, just more detailed and higher resolution, and so forth. So it allows for a fractal or holographic type consciousness and life. And so wherever you have microtubules, you could have little bits of consciousness of a whole organism. So, for example, I was an anesthesiologist for 49 years. I retired last year. And back, I used to do cardiac anesthesia. And and we did heart transplants. And then our heart surgeons would come in and might have done a transplant on somebody and come, hey, remember that guy? And he interesting story. He had after he got his new heart, he had never liked to dance before. All of a sudden, he started dancing. He became a big dancer. It became his main hobby. And it turned out he was trying to tell us that the donor of the heart was actually a dancer. The donor loved dancing, and then something happened, and somebody else got that heart, and that person started to dance. And I think that we heard a lot of these stories, and they didn't like to talk about it that much because it's kind of spooky and might have dissuaded people from donating. But it wasn't that uncommon, and I think it's because there are quite a few microtubules in the heart. I mean, the heart has all these nerve ganglia, the AV node and the Purkinje, all these neurons, which are full of microtubules, and so microtubules store memory too. And so I think this memory and consciousness, or at least memory, was transferred in the donor microtubules and I think that can happen. And but in one body, in our bodies, I think there's quantum entanglement. So microtubules in the fascia or in any tissue or organ can be entangled and collectively oscillating with those elsewhere. So not all the time. Maybe it comes and goes. We're not always conscious of our whole body, but at times we are. And I think the same thing in the brain. Some parts are conscious and it kind of moves around. Which microtubules are lighting up and having these quantum events and collapses and becoming conscious. So I think because of the anesthesia connection, that our theory, compared to any other theory, has the most evidence by far. And most other theories of consciousness uh, treat treat the neurons as a simple on-off switch. Treat the brain as a complex computer of simple neurons, cartoon neurons, just membranes, a one or a zero, algorithmic, and kind of a dumb on-off switch. Whereas a single cell, a paramecium, can swim around, find food, find a mate, have sex, can learn, do all kinds of things. And it's one cell, and it does it with its microtubules, which sense and move everything. And so the microtubules seem to be the organelle that is responsible for, they're kind of the cell's nervous system, but also their motor and actuator system. So they're quite they're quite versatile. And when I retired from anesthesia, I started working in astrobiology with my colleague Dante Loretta, who has been looking for the origin of life his whole career. And he was in charge of this NASA probe that went to an asteroid and brought back these organic molecules. And we're studying for quantum oscillations. And when we find them, then we see if they go away with anesthesia. And we see these oscillations, these simple. They're not that simple. They're like organic molecules with 35 aromatic rings. That's what you see in the organic material coming back from in a meteorite or an asteroid. And so they oscillate, and we hope to see if they can be anesthetized. I think actually that as far as the origin of life, and this is how I got into this business, because I wrote this paper in 2017, and then Dante read it when he was waiting for the probe to come back, and it basically suggested that consciousness came first. That due to the mechanism, Roger Penrose suggested that there was objective reduction, conscious experience in the primordial soup. And these organic molecules, the same aromatic rings, very much like dopamine, which is the pleasure molecule, started oscillating coherently and having these collapses and having occasional moments of proto-conscious awareness. It wouldn't be like our consciousness, but just simple feelings, some of which would be pleasurable. And that would be what I suggested in the paper was they would be a feedback fitness function for the system to self-organize to optimize feelings. Because isn't that what we do, really? Everything we do is based on feelings, we'll feel better either immediately or, after we go to college, raise a family, we can delay it. But everything is, animals in a lab, it's all about reward or aversion. So I think the only way that evolution makes sense and the origin of life makes sense is if feelings were there first. Of course, you won't see anything about that in evolutionary texts or in Darwin because nobody had a theory of consciousness that made any sense or that was scientifically testable, other than kind of hand wavy emerging complexity, which I think is the wrong way to go. So, if Roger's right, and it's the only theory that's actually been put forth, and he did win a Nobel Prize, so we should take him seriously. Um, uh, that consciousness came first and could have been the spark of life, and I think that's what happened, and that's why
I think there's a lot of people who say that. I mean, I think of Neil Thesis' Notes on Complexity, and there's a lot of writing where people will say things come from consciousness. Consciousness didn't arise out of matter. Matter arises out of consciousness. And really, we create stuff. We make up words. We create things. So where does it start? I think that's a profound thing. I'd be curious what you guys have to say about all of that.
I completely agree with Stuart that neuronal microtubules may orchestrate those quantum moments that give rise to conscious awareness, and where I'd extend that view is to say that fascia provides the continuum through which those moments become embodied, how quantum coherence becomes lived coherence. So rather than consciousness being confined to neurons, I see it as distributed through a fascia-informed Tensegrity field. I'm not sure, Stu, if you're familiar with
Buckminster Fuller. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Tremendous.
So again, scale-free. It's fractal. It's
microtubules are like let's say he had compressed elements, and the microtubules are actually compressed by the actin that kind of pulls them taut, like in a circus tent, the wires that pull the tent down and the poles are holding it up. That's kind of the microtubules, like the poles, but they're also the nervous system processing information.
Yeah,
I want to say about
bones.
Pardon me?
Say that again, John?
I think that the microtubules in many ways act as bones, that the compressive.
Yeah. Like struts. Yeah, I think that there is something about the tension compression management that they're
but
producing,
just as an analogy, as an analogy.
JC.
Yes. I heard and I read a paper concerning microtubules, and it seemed that the microtubules are able to move to lengths inside the cell. Can you confirm that?
That they move? They move everything. They themselves can move, but they also act as they can be involved in movement in several ways. They can be like railroad tracks, and the motor proteins, the dynein and kinesin, move along, or they can the motor proteins can actually move them. They can slither along, and of course they make up flagella and cilia, which are particular motile organs to move cells or to move things past cells. So yeah, they actually connect movement to information and are the actuators. So they're the sensors, the actuators. They're kind of like the nervous system in each cell. And they're also part of the centriole, which is these large mega cylinders made up of microtubules, which are actually also the cilia and centrioles are the basis for all optical systems, photo detection systems in primitive organisms, ciliated ectoderm with the first eye cups and so forth. So they also detect photons. So in our work with in the time crystal business, we've seen again that the microtubules can oscillate in kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and terahertz, which is photons. And we know that also microtubules generate photons due to the oscillations. So they can sense and actuate at all these different frequencies. So they allow biology to transcend scale. So you can have a small system and a large system, or you can have both in one organism. So you have small information at different scales.
Because and I guess that these microtubules are able to move in the 3 dimension.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
embryological development depends on them making the shape and everything.
So this movement concerning microtubules are the same as the movement we can see with fibrillar network, because they moved in the 3 dimension also. They can slide, they can length, they can divide. And I think it's very surprising to see that the mechanical comportment is the same inside the cell and out the cell.
Yeah, outside the cell, that would be. I don't think they're microtubules outside the cell, but they could be.
No, not microtubules. Microtubules are inside the cell, of course.
Right.
But the fibers outside of the cell has the same behavior, the same mechanical behavior. They can slide, length, divide, and in the three-dimensional space, the same.
They might be entangled. They might be, coupled by quantum entanglement with. I think entanglement is probably necessary in the brain for normal consciousness and life itself. I think I've kind of come to define life as for reasons I just said, requiring quantum coherence and requiring consciousness. I think I don't think I used to think that you could have living systems without consciousness, but now I don't think so. I think even the simplest organisms must have some way to have feelings to motivate them to do stuff. Otherwise, why would they do anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Absolutely.
But that I know Donald Hoffman doesn't agree with that, doesn't he? Game theory. He has a different view. He is a different.
I know Don pretty well, and he basically it's kind of a Buddhist stance, and there's an interface, but I think the interface that he talks about is the same as collapse of the wave function. So he doesn't get into biology, but I think when you have the interface between the physical reality and the mind, although he doesn't believe in physical reality at all, which
No.
but his interface would be the collapse of the wave function, and I think you need microtubules. So then he gets into other stuff about the Planck scale and the geometry and whatnot, but
space-time not being fundamental and so on. But it'd be interesting for those people who are listening to this particular conversation to look at his side of things. Donald Hoffman, yeah, very good.
Yeah, I also, what I'm going to go back to what JC had just mentioned, even though microtubules aren't in the extracellular matrix, the fibers
No, I don't say that microtubules are
exactly
inside the extracellular.
They're in the cells, right? But I'm saying that the fibers are almost like the scaffolding outside of the cells.
Yeah.
And there is some sort of a mirror there where that's the thing that really intrigued me was when you look at the under microscopy, the fibers kind of look like microtubules in the cell. They almost mirror it exactly. They just are comprised of a different substance, but
are they collagen?
Yes.
Collagen?
The collagen, yes. Collagen and elastin. It's a sort of fibrillar network with an interlacing of fibers. Cells are inside this interlacing of fibers. Do you understand my English? Okay. Yeah. And and thanks to the mobility of the mechanical of the fibrillar network, cells can change of shape.
That's the big issue.
That's a big thing. Yeah.
That's what the microtubules determine the shape. They determine the geometry of the cell.
The microtubule determines the shape of the cell.
Right.
But the fibrillar network determines the shape of the cell.
From the outside?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Do they have aromatic rings in collagen? I think they do. So they could be entangled.
Superpositional rings.
Stuart, you will see in the movie, there is one sequence, or you have cells all together. And then I collapse a little side of the fibrillar network. And you can see immediately the cells retracting because the cells was maintained in its position thanks to the tension of the fibrillar network.
Okay, more tensegrity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I return to something about the heart?
Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Hameroff, you were talking about the heart and the microtubules of the nervous system of the heart. So many manual therapists bristle when you say that that all memory and all consciousness is in the brain alone. And manual therapists will say, certainly there's some remnant, some imprint of trauma, particularly in the fascia of the body. And I like what Sue was talking about, okay, the microtubules are intracellular. They're not in the extracellular matrix. But we have fibroblasts in there. We have other cells, and we have cardiac cells that are embedded within the fascia, and we have muscle cells that are embedded within the fascia. And so all of a sudden it becomes possible of entanglement with the cells that are embedded within the fascia, that the fascia is reflecting the memory or the imprint of that trauma in such a way that when we are getting energy into the system through mechanotransduction and through piezoelectric kind of processes through our manual therapy, there's some sort of awakening of this imprint. Am I on the right track with this?
Well, it could be. I think maybe they become conscious. Is that what you're saying at any one time? That's possible.
Well, that the stimulation of the emotion in the moment, when I'm doing a scar release of a woman who had a traumatic cesarean, and all of a sudden she's reliving the rush to the emergency room, the rush to try to get this baby out, the trauma that she went through, it's almost as though it's happening again all this at the same time through this pressure into the scar of the cesarean scar. And so there's something about that imprint of trauma. I think Porges talks about it too.
Mhm.
It's recorded in the fascia, yeah.
Right, in the fascia and the interaction with the vagus and the sensory nervous system, the interoceptive nervous system.
Well, that's why I speak of local and global
Right,
consciousness.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Local consciousness expresses itself
Mhm.
in specific fascial regions, what I sometimes call the sentient awareness of tissues.
Mhm.
Global
Right.
consciousness is the integrated coherence of the whole. So you can see that separation vividly in the example I gave of wide awake surgery. I think that's a
Yeah.
reasonably a good example. Even
Right.
though everything I say could be wrong, by the way, I'm open to challenge on anything.
Well, and I also, like thinking of things that go wrong, like, Stuart, you had talked to me about Fabricia Ambrosio and her work, and just what they're talking about, like with something like Alzheimer's. And you had mentioned that you guys are using low intensity ultrasound for healing to the resident microtubules, and that you're using that ultrasound gently to the brain for Alzheimer's to help in
Yeah, we're doing a
healing.
study on
Can,
that.
can
Yeah,
you talk a little about that? I mean, I found that fascinating.
yeah. So Alzheimer's, there's two lesions, the amyloid plaques that everybody focuses on, and they're spending billions of dollars for these anti-amyloid drugs, and they don't work, and they're toxic. And they cost 30,000 a year per patient. And the drug companies and the scientists working on them are getting rich. But the amyloid plaques have very little to do with the symptoms. You can have the amyloid plaques and no symptoms. You can have symptoms and no amyloid plaques. The other lesion is the neurofibrillary tangle, which is tau protein, which is a microtubule associated protein, which is inside the neurons. The amyloid is outside. Inside the neurons, you get these tangles, which are the tau protein, which is falls off the microtubules. The microtubules destabilize and disassemble, and so they collapse. It's like they just literally disintegrate, and the neurons shrink. You lose neuronal volume, you lose synapses because you pull away from it. The whole brain shrinks. So how do you treat that? Well, one way is microtubule stabilizing drugs, which actually seem to work, but the drug companies killed the research because the patents were gone on that. But you can also treat it with ultrasound because microtubules, as I mentioned before, have these oscillations in hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and megahertz in electromagnetics is radio waves. And I wasn't interested in putting radio waves into my brain or anybody else's brain, but in mechanical, it's ultrasound. And so we started doing studies on ultrasound into the brain back in 2012 and published in 2013 and showed mood enhancement in a double-blind study from unfocused ultrasound. And then in 2015, people started finding benefit of ultrasound for Alzheimer's. And there's been quite a few studies on that now. The drug companies are still suppressing it because they'd rather, they can't make money. Nobody's going to make money because you can use a very inexpensive device, which is what we're doing in our study, which is kind of a do-it-yourself study, and then we monitor. So,
Sure. In specific hertz, or I mean, you mentioned kilohertz and megahertz and gigahertz, but is there Why is ultrasound having such a therapeutic effect or such an impact?
Because, well, it depends who you ask, but I think it's because it's resonating the microtubules to reassemble if they've disassembled, or to increase their resonance, or to increase some property of the microtubule, some functional property of the microtubules. And also what they call low frequency ultrasound, which is actually kilohertz, reverses senescence in cells. And also photons, infrared photons that pulse at 40 hertz into the somehow skull is good also. So any of these frequencies, all of which are resonant in microtubules, seem to help. So it's kind of like there's entry points at any of these frequency ranges.
Are you familiar with Dr. Carl McMakin's frequency-specific microcurrent? Have you heard of?
No, I know a little bit about that, but not too much.
Okay, no, it seems to have some kind of link to that, maybe.
I'm telling you, you guys all need to talk a whole lot more about these kind of topics, because I think I think the notion of frequency and vibration as transforming and stimulating what's going on inside of a cell is the thing that we need to study even more. I think that the people
and every cell vibrates at its own frequency.
Yeah. And so if you get things tuned, it's almost like tuning.
Wait, hang on. I'm going to maybe disagree with that, because not every cell, but you can have many different frequencies, and yeah, they can have different frequencies, but I think different cells can be entangled at their microtubules. So some of them at least are going to be oscillating at the same time. Now some of them can be on their own and be different depending, but they can also be entangled and coupled. And I think you need quite a few neurons, microtubules neuron in the brain to have a conscious moment, the kind of conscious moments we have. So yeah, they can all have different frequencies, but they can also be tuned into it's very much like a symphony, actually. I call it the instead of a computer, the brain's a quantum orchestra, because we have all these different frequencies. And neuroscience is just looking at EEG, which is up to maybe 40 hertz, which is only the very slow frequency. It's like going to the symphony and only hearing the bass and the percussion, and they're missing the piccolos and the violins and everything else. They're only tuning into the very, very low frequency. And that's where neuroscience is at. They're missing all these high frequency stuff inside, including quantum stuff. So I think neuroscience is, with our cartoon neurons and only hearing the low bass frequencies, are really kind of out of touch with reality. They won't look inside the neuron. Neuroscientists are very reluctant to consider anything inside the neuron as having anything to do with cognition or consciousness, when it's just the opposite. I think memory is in microtubules, cognition is in microtubules, and I think they're really dumbing it down to match AI. I think part of the problem is actually AI is pouring money into neurocomputational labs who look at the brain as a simple dumb computer instead of a quantum orchestra or something like what we're proposing, or some other.
I think so. Yeah, you're right.
Really nicely said. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my God, I want this conversation going for 4 more hours so I can learn more, but we're kind of at the end of our time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And firstly, thank you guys so much for just coming in and even getting a conversation going. And I'm so excited that you are somehow frequency-wise connected now, which gets me excited too. I can't wait until you watch JC's video, because I think that there's something there in a mind like yours to watch work like JC's. And I think that there might be more conversations that will arise because of that connection. And of course, I do want to, acknowledge and just sort of reaffirm the wholeness of the body and the mystery of consciousness, the little c and the big C, and what is it and how does it work. But I really think, Stu, your work and what you're trying to propose, it just makes a lot of sense. And I think from that lens, especially from anesthesia and watching what happens under anesthesia, it really does seem like there's a huge opening here for more, conversations on the relationship of all microtubules and again, the way that the fibers in fascia are pushing against the cells. I think there's a communication happening from that dialogue, that there's a dialogue there that we are still not fully connecting the dots with in neuroscience to fascial research, but maybe this is the first step in that, perhaps.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sue.
Well, thank you guys so much. Any closing thoughts that you want to leave everybody with? Anybody have anything else that you want to mention?
I want to ask JC what he remembers about that quote.
That's very
If
great. I
fascia's
think it
not
was
the
more to do with JC. I think it was more to do with the idea of connective tissue versus just exclusively fascia. I may be wrong
Yes.
in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I
think-
use that word loosely. Sometimes I don't know which word to use anymore. Is it fascia? Is it connective
I
tissue?
think it's the foundation of life. I do.
I think there's something there. I think that the idea that they are both co-evolving in embryology, that there's a conversation going. And I always describe the nervous system and fascia as kind of like a superpower couple in the body, that oftentimes we're always just like so, enamored. It's kind of like the central nervous system. We always talk about this part of the nervous system, but this autonomic aspect and the peripheral nervous system kind of takes second seat, like it's not as important, but really they're both equally important in a conversation. And until we get the power
And the
juggernauts like
framework
you guys
within which
together,
it lays and is
yeah, it's
embodied.
got to make sense. It has to connect, right? There's a
Yeah.
dot here that we're still trying to find.
Everything is connected. Everything.
There it is.
No
There it
beginning
is.
and no end.
I love that.
No beginning, no end.
To John, Carol, Stuart, JC, thank you guys so much for coming on Anatomical Gangster and sharing your wisdom. And for those of you guys listening, I hope that you will share this with everybody that you know and continue this conversation with any points that you found interesting in the show notes. And of course, I hope that you go and you discover all of these researchers and clinicians. If you have not, I hope that this sparks the interest where you'll go to learn more from their books and their education. It's definitely something to take the time with. So as always, thank you guys so much for being part of this. Stay curious, stay a little gangster, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sue. Nice to meet y'all.
Bye-bye.
Yes, nice to meet you, Stu.
Well, I can't wait to see the comments and what you guys thought about this conversation and this vision of the autonomic nervous system and fascia as a power couple that resonates with me as this idea of the body systems being intertwined. I think that it is all a collection of parts, but a reflection of the relationship is what we're missing. And again, what if the microtubules inside neurons and the collagen fibrils in fascia aren't separate actors, but they're mirrors, yin to yang, structure to spirit, cognition to sensation? What if consciousness isn't a brain-bound phenomenon, but really it is a full body experience, a union between the autonomic nervous system and the fascial web that holds us together? One of my mentors, Thomas Finley, once pointed to the literature that shows the microtubules pushing from within a cell are met by the extracellular matrix pushing back. It's a dynamic tension. It's a dialogue, a dance. And I think if he were alive today, I think he would love to see this idea emerge out of a conversation on this topic. And Jaap van der Wal, which we mentioned in this podcast, he's an embryologist and a phenomenologist. He reminds us that we're already whole from the beginning. We're a process. And that's the lens which I see the body. It's not a machine. It's not in a mechanistic way, but as a living, breathing relationship. Fascia and the autonomic nervous system, like the power couple of consciousness. One feels, one regulates, and together they move us through life. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation and you share it and you comment below. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. And again, stay tuned and I'll see you all next week. Thanks for being part of the conversation.